You know that feeling when you're in a situation, maybe abroad, and things just feel off. Like the rules are invisible, but you keep bumping into them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That sense of disorientation.
Yeah. A friend, Erin Meyer, she's done amazing work on this, told me about this dream she kept having in Paris. Groceries just vanishing from her cart in the supermarket.
Uh-huh. That's brilliant.
Isn't it? It sounds funny, but it perfectly captures that frustration when something fundamental just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that's often exactly what happens with cross-cultural stuff.
That disappearing groceries image,
Yeah.
it really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? That mismatch of expectations.
Right.
So today we're diving deep into your sources, really focusing on Erin Meyer's book, The Culture Map.
Right.
Think of this as decoding those cultural grocery disappearances and figuring out how to shop effectively in those different cultural supermarkets.
Exactly. So our mission for you today is to pull out those really practical insights, those frameworks. We want you to be able to sidestep the cultural traps, understand different communication styles, basically just be more effective internationally.
And hopefully give you some of those aha moments along the way. Quick, useful knowledge, not dense theory.
Right, no jargon. And Meyer's work is perfect for that. It's praised by folks at Google, Huffington Post,
Well,
because it uses real-life examples plus a clear structure.
and she knows her stuff. She's an in-seat professor, lived in Paris, runs global team modules. She's got the personal and the professional chops.
Yeah. The book uses 8 key cultural dimensions, things like how we communicate, give feedback, persuade, lead, decide things, build trust, handle disagreement, even how we see time.
All the big ones.
Definitely. So our goal here, extract the actionable strategies, the key takeaways you can use, like tomorrow, to understand and work better with people from different backgrounds. Keep it focused, digestible.
Okay, let's jump in. Where should we start? Maybe with the absolute foundation.
Yeah,
Communication styles.
perfect. Let's kick off with the story Meyer tells about a colleague in Paris, Bo Chen, from China. Super smart guy, right? But in meetings, totally silent. Erin, leading the meetings, naturally thought, well, maybe he just doesn't have anything to add.
A common assumption to make, especially from a Western perspective.
Exactly, but it was a huge cultural misunderstanding about, communication expectations. Bo was playing by different rules.
And Bo's perspective is so revealing. He saw Erin, the leader, as the one who should explicitly invite him to speak. Until then, being quiet was, for him, a sign of respect. He even quoted his mother.
Oh, yeah, that was great.
You have 2 eyes, 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. You should use them accordingly. It just perfectly highlights that difference in prioritizing speaking versus listening.
It really does. And this leads straight into Meyer's first scale, communicating. Low context versus high context. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. Low context communication is explicit, direct. The message is mostly in the words themselves. Think of that American saying, say what you mean what you say.
Or the classic presentation advice. Tell him what you tell him, then tell him what you told him. Very clear.
Exactly. The US, Canada, Australia, Netherlands, Germany, the UK, they tend to lean this way. The message is spelled out.
Okay, so very little implied. What about the other end, high context?
High context is the opposite. It's implicit, indirect. It relies a lot on subtext, nonverbal cues, shared history, the overall context. The words themselves might carry less weight than what's not said.
Reading between the lines.
Precisely. Japan is a classic example with their concept of KY, someone who can't read the air. But also, China, India, Indonesia, Kenya, many African nations, even places like France, Spain, Latin America, they use more high-context communication.
Ah, okay, so Bo's silence makes perfect sense now. He was waiting for the context, the implicit invitation from Erin.
Exactly. And you can see how easily misunderstandings arise, right? High-context folks might see low-context speakers as, well, maybe a bit obvious, blunt, even condescending.
Stating the obvious.
Yeah. And low-context people might see high-context speakers as vague, maybe hiding something, or just unclear. Meyer mentions a British CEO, Stuart Shuttleworth, whose international expansion really struggled because of these communication clashes.
Wow. So, okay, if you're working with people from higher context cultures, what are some strategies? How do you bridge that gap?
Listening becomes crucial. Really listening. Like someone in the book said, listen to what's meant, not just what's said.
Deeper listening.
Yeah. Reflect more. Ask clarifying questions. Really tune in to body language, tone. Don't jump to conclusions. And if you need to, use local intermediaries who get the nuances.
And you mentioned something about no in some Asian cultures.
Right. A direct no can be considered impolite.
Yeah.
You might hear things like that might be difficult or just silence or change of subject. You have to listen for the indirect refusal.
That's really key to pick up on. Okay, what about multicultural teams? Lots of different styles mixed together.
That's where setting ground rules is vital. Especially if you have multiple high-context cultures interacting, they might misunderstand each other too.
Good point.
So have the team actually discuss and agree on how they'll communicate. Maybe agree to be more explicit than usual, for clarity's sake.
Sounds like a good plan. What about putting things in writing? That's standard in low context, right?
It is, but be careful. In high-context cultures, demanding everything in writing can sometimes signal distrust, like, don't you trust my word? There's a great example with Bathari Samsudin, an Indonesian manager with a German boss. She learned she had to explicitly explain why things needed to be documented, like for process reasons, so her team didn't feel personally distrusted.
So communicating about communication, being transparent about the process itself.
Exactly. Okay, shall we move on to another tricky area? Evaluating performance, giving negative feedback.
Yes, let's. This feels like a minefield. The evaluating scale, direct versus indirect feedback.
Right. We heard about Willem, the Dutch guy, who saw direct criticism as a gift. But Meyer immediately points out how painful that directness can be elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely depends on your background. And she talks about upgraders and downgraders, right? Words that ramp up or soften feedback.
Exactly. Upgraders like absolutely or totally, often used in direct cultures before criticism. Downgraders like maybe, perhaps, a bit, slightly, used in indirect cultures to cushion the blow.
The British are masters of the downgrader, apparently. That pilot announcement example after the engines failed. Yeah. Classic understatement.
Hilarious, but true. And that Anglo-Dutch translation guide example is brilliant, too. It shows how easily understatement gets misinterpreted. A British boss says, perhaps you should think about it.
And the Dutch employee hears, nice suggestion, but optional.
Exactly. While the boss meant, do this or you're in trouble. Markus Klopfer, the German finance director, nearly got fired over a similar misunderstanding.
Wow. So even within generally direct cultures like the Netherlands or Germany, there are still massive nuances. You can't just barge in being direct.
Absolutely not. Meyer warns low-context folks against just trying to mimic directness without understanding the local flavor, the how. It can backfire badly.
Okay, what about the U.S.? Generally low-context communication, but feedback. Where does it sit?
It's interesting. The U.S. is generally low-context, but tends towards indirect negative feedback.
Yeah.
The classic feedback sandwich.
Yes. Start positive, slip in the criticism, end positive.
Right. The intention is to soften it. But Meyer finds many cultures, especially more direct ones, see it as insincere, confusing, even manipulative. Willem and Martin, the Dutch guys, were totally baffled by American feedback.
I can imagine. And Meyer's son Ethan in the French school system, that feedback was something else.
Oh, yeah. 8 errors, skills not acquired, apply yourself. A world away from the American approach.
Definitely a far cry. So directness isn't always rude, and indirectness isn't always clear.
Exactly. Sabine Dulac's story, the French woman at the Chicago conference debrief. She was stunned by the Americans praising an event she thought was a disaster. Total clash of styles.
So the takeaway for working with Americans on feedback, listen very carefully for that negative bit tucked inside the positive praise.
That's the key. Now, what about cultures that are both high context and use indirect feedback? Quadrant D in her model. How does that work?
Sounds like navigating a maze blindfolded.
It can feel like it. Meyer uses an example. Needing to remove someone, Budi, from presenting sessions because they weren't good. His Indonesian colleague, Aini, suggested strategies for blurring the message.
Blurring the message.
Yeah, like giving feedback slowly over time, focusing critique on the team's performance, not the individual, or just saying the good stuff and leaving out the bad.
Wow. So praise the good parts and hope they infer the problems with the parts you don't mention.
Pretty much. Aini actually reviewed Budi's documents, praised the strong sections, and said nothing about the weak ones, hoping he'd get the hint.
That requires a lot of subtlety on both sides.
It does. But, and this is crucial, Meyer adds a caveat. In hierarchical cultures that also favor indirect feedback, sometimes the boss will give very direct, even harsh, negative feedback. Hierarchy can trump the usual indirectness.
Okay, so power distance plays a role there too. That's a really important nuance. Okay, let's shift again. Persuasion. How do we convince people across cultures?
This brings us to the persuading scale. Are you principles first or applications first in your reasoning?
Okay, explain those.
Principles first means you start with the theory, the concept, the background, the why. Then you move to practical examples. Applications first is the reverse. Start with the practical examples, the case studies, the how, and then maybe generalize to the principle.
So principles first wants the logic laid out before the solution.
Exactly. Think Cara Williams, the American engineer in Germany. Her German colleagues needed to understand her methodology, the data, the whole framework before they'd even consider her recommendations. They kept asking about the reasoning first.
That sounds like a fundamental difference in just think.
It often is.
Yeah.
And Meyer connects it brilliantly to education systems. Think math class. Applications first, like in the US-UK often, might give you the formula, then lots of problems to practice applying it.
Right, learn by doing.
Whereas a principles first system might spend much more time on the derivation, the theory behind the formula, before you apply it. Same for language learning grammar rules first versus diving into conversation.
That makes so much sense. Where do different countries generally sit on this scale?
Meyer has a chart, figure 3.1. Applications first clusters include the US, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Then you get the Nordics, leaning a bit more principles first. Latin American and Germanic cultures are often in the middle. And then strongly, principles first include France, Russia, Belgium.
But it's relative, right?
Always relative.
Yeah.
And UK is more principles first than the US, but more applications first than France. And importantly, Meyer notes Asian cultures often have a different frame altogether, more holistic thinking, which we need to touch on.
Okay, so if I'm trying to persuade someone from a principles-first culture, I need to build my theoretical case first. Spend time on the background.
Definitely. More time on the why before the what or how. Jorge da Silva learned this the hard way, trying to convince his U.S. team about a new safety method. He started with theory, they were skeptical. He switched to practical examples, they got it. He had to adapt.
What about mixed audiences? Global teams often have both types.
That's tough but common. The best bet is to cycle back and forth. Give the concrete examples for the applications first, folks, but then explicitly address the theory, the methodology, for the principles first listeners. Don't skip their why questions.
Acknowledge both needs. Makes sense. Any broader strategies for teams struggling with this?
Awareness is step one. Maybe have everyone read this section of the book, discuss it openly. Using cultural bridges bicultural team members can help translate. But mostly, it's about patience, flexibility, and adapting to each other.
Okay, you mentioned holistic thinking in Asian cultures. How does that fit in?
Right, this is based on research by Nisbet and others. They found, when shown pictures, Americans tended to focus on the main object, while many East Asians focused more on the background, the context, the relationships between things.
Interesting. Specific versus holistic.
Exactly. So in a business context, for holistic thinkers, you often need to start with the big picture. Show how everything connects, the overall goal, before drilling down into specifics. Merup Malecki in Japan found individual incentives didn't work well. His team needed the grand overview first.
So paint the whole landscape before focusing on the trees. Got it. Okay, let's move to leadership. Hierarchy. Power. How much respect do you expect?
The leading scale. Egalitarian versus hierarchical. The story of Ulrich Jepsen, the Danish manager in Russia, really sets the stage here.
What happened to him?
He was totally thrown when his Russian team called him Mr. President, deferred to him constantly, and wouldn't take initiative without his explicit, okay. So different from egalitarian Denmark.
Wow, yeah. Going from shared responsibility to being the ultimate boss figure.
Exactly. And while most people say they prefer egalitarian styles, Meyer points out our actual behavior, our unconscious expectations about hierarchy often differ. Carlos Gomez's experience in Amsterdam, even in a generally egalitarian place, showed these subtle differences still matter.
And this connects to Hofstede's power distance concept.
Yes, it builds on it. Looks at things like how much respect for the boss. Is the boss seen as, almost godlike? Can you skip levels? What actually signals authority?
Like the bike to work example.
Perfect example. CEO bikes to work in Denmark or Australia. Great. Down to earth. One of us. In China. Steve Henning found his biking was seen by some staff as, well, maybe not projecting the right image of authority. Signals get misread.
Fascinating. And history plays a role here too, right? Like Confucianism.
Definitely. Confucianism's emphasis on social order, hierarchical relationships, father-son, ruler-subject, deeply influenced East Asian views, leading to a more paternalistic leadership-style expectation. Contrast that with cultures praising the CEO who eats in the canteen. Figure 4.3 summarizes these differences well.
So if I'm an egalitarian manager leading a team in a more hierarchical culture, what do I need to do differently?
Respect the structure. That's huge. Sarah Peterson learned this in Bangalore, directly emailing Rishi Rangan's team members without going through him first. Big problem. It was seen as undermining him.
So go through the proper channels, show deference.
Yes, and understand that directly interacting with junior staff might make them uncomfortable too. Often, the manager who's the cultural minority needs to adapt most. Jepsen in Russia realized he had to maintain more distance, act more paternalistically to be effective there.
It's interesting Meyer mentions Germans sometimes see Americans as more hierarchical than Americans see themselves. How does that work?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, right? Americans value individualism, often downplay status. But Germans might interpret the American directness in giving instructions, maybe a perceived lack of questioning authority upwards, as signs of a stricter hierarchy than Americans feel they have. It's all about perception.
Perception is everything. Okay, let's tackle decision making. How do we decide stuff? Big D or little d?
The deciding scale. Consensual versus top-down. Meyer brings back the German-American merger talks here. A classic clash.
Americans like quick decisions, right? Made by the person in charge.
Generally, yes. Quick individual decisions. Meyer calls them small d decisions. Ready to be implemented, maybe adjusted later.
And the Germans.
More consensual. They often prefer thorough discussion, getting group agreement first. A big D decision. It involves more people, like the Aufsichtsrat, Supervisory Board, and Vorstand, Management Board, takes longer up front.
So small d is faster initially, big D requires more buy-in first.
Exactly. Erin Meyer's own story with her Swedish boss, Per Ingman, is telling. Endless emails just to agree on a meeting date. That's the Swedish consensual style in action.
Must have driven her crazy.
Probably. But the flip side is, once that big D decision is made, implementation can be really fast because everyone's already bought in. Whereas a top-down small d might face implementation resistance later.
What about Japan? Hierarchical culture, but big on consensus too. Seems contradictory.
It does, but their ringy system is famous for this. It's hierarchical, yes, but decisions involve circulating proposals extensively to get input and consensus from all levels before it's formally decided. Takes ages up front.
But then implementation is smooth.
Super smooth and quick, usually. Because the capital D decision has full backing. Sheldon, working in Tokyo, learned he had to invest heavily in that early consensus building.
So patience is key with consensual cultures. What else helps?
Expect longer processes, demonstrate patience, stay engaged, check in regularly. With more top-down cultures, be ready for speed, provide info when asked, respect the leader's call.
And for mixed teams.
Crucial to agree on the process up front. How will this team make decisions? Vote. Boss decides. Need 100% agreement. Set deadlines. How flexible are decisions once made? Using the small d, big D language can actually help the team understand these different approaches.
That's a really practical tip. Okay, let's talk trust. The bedrock of any relationship, right? But how it's built seems really different across cultures.
Absolutely. The trusting scale. Task-based versus relationship-based.
Task-based is about reliability. You do good work, I trust you.
Pretty much. Cognitive trust. Built on accomplishments, skills, dependability. Relationship-based is more effective trust. Built on personal connection, liking, shared experience, feeling of warmth.
And the anecdote about the Americans negotiating in Brazil highlights this.
Perfectly. Americans focused on efficiency, short lunches. Brazilians interpreted this as cold, disinterested in them as people, therefore untrustworthy. They needed that personal connection first.
Like the team struggling in Shanghai needing guangxi.
Exactly. Guangxi, those deep, reciprocal personal ties. They literally had to forget the deal for a while and just focus on building friendships, emotional bonds before business could happen.
So in task-based places, it's what you do. In relationship-based, it's who you are and the connection.
That's a good way to put it. And in some cultures, like China, these two trust types are really intertwined. Trying to separate them, like saying it's just business, can feel insincere.
Jeb's story with his Chinese rowing partner illustrates that. He thought friendship meant easy business terms.
Right. He assumed the personal bond automatically meant business favors.
Yeah.
But it's more nuanced. Yes, business is personal, but professional diligence is still expected. The relationship opens the door, it doesn't guarantee the outcome.
And the peach versus coconut analogy, how does that work?
It's a great visual. Task-based cultures, like the U.S., are often like peaches. Soft, friendly outer layer, easy to start a superficial chat. But getting to the hard inner pit of deep friendship takes time. Might be harder.
Okay, and coconuts.
Relationship-based cultures, like Brazil or maybe Russia, are more like coconuts. Harder outer shell, takes more effort to break through initially, but once you're inside, the relationship is often deeper, stronger, more enduring.
Like that German participant in Brazil mistaking initial friendliness for deep friendship.
Exactly. He misread the cultural cues about relationship depth.
So in relationship-based cultures, you really need to invest time in building that personal connection. How do you do that, especially remotely?
Finding common ground is key. Alberto Gianni building rapport with his Indian software team by learning about their music, there's a perfect example. Showing genuine interest in their lives, their culture. Loyalty and openness often follow that personal connection.
It requires shifting from your business self to your personal self.
Yes. Joining social activities, even if it feels tiring, like Ted Crooner found in Mexico. Sharing meals is huge almost everywhere. Guillermo Nunez learned lunch in Norway was strictly business, very different from Spain.
And drinks after work, like in Japan.
Very important in Japan.
Yeah.
Hiroki's advice about hani, true feelings, versus tatame, public face. Drinks help break down barriers, show the real person. But it's not just alcohol. Karaoke, spas in Japan, tea in Arab cultures. The point is lowering social barriers, showing you're trustworthy as a person.
Does the communication channel matter too? Email versus phone versus face-to-face.
It can. Task-based cultures often prioritize efficiency. Email is fine. Relationship-based. Starting with something more personal is often better. Phone over email. Travel for face-to-face if you can. Sheldon Blake's Saudi clients needed that social chat before business.
And Erin Meyer's own emails going unanswered in Paris until she built a relationship.
Right. As she says, trust is like insurance. It's an investment you need to make up front before you need it.
Great point. Okay, another potentially difficult one. Disagreement. How do cultures handle conflict? The needle, not the knife.
The disagreeing scale. Confrontational versus avoids confrontation. Meyer starts with that funny Garrison Keillor skit about the argumentative French chef Maurice.
Setting the stage for the French reputation for debate.
Exactly. And Erin Meyer describes being uncomfortable at a French dinner party with this really spirited debate between friends, much more direct than typical American norms.
So some cultures see open disagreement as normal, even healthy, while others try hard to avoid it.
That's the core difference. In Confucian societies, China, Korea, Japan, harmony and saving face are critical. Disagreement can cause loss of face, disrupt order. Deference to rank is common.
Whereas in the West,
Differing ideas are more expected. In France, debate is practically taught, seen as stimulating. With confrontation, you reach excellence, as one French manager put it.
where do countries generally fall here?
France is quite confrontational. Japan strongly avoids confrontation. US, UK, other Anglo cultures are usually somewhere in the middle. A key question is, if someone disagrees with my idea, are they attacking me or just the idea? In confrontational cultures, it's easier to separate the two.
Helpful distinction. So if you're managing folks from an avoids confrontation culture, you need to be careful how you ask for feedback.
Very careful. Harold Manson, the Danish manager in Tokyo, couldn't get his Japanese team to critique his ideas. They wouldn't disagree with the boss, his colleague advised him. Don't give your opinion first, maybe even have them meet without you.
Wow. And phrasing is important too.
Definitely. Use softer language. I don't quite understand. Could you explain more? Not direct contradiction.
What about the other way? If you're from an avoids confrontation culture, working with more confrontational types?
Be cautious with strong language until you really get the norms. Wei Lin, teaching in Europe, found his attempts at constructive confrontation came across as hostile. He learned to let students disagree forcefully, but he responded politely in his own style.
Maintaining his own style while allowing theirs. Interesting. What about phrases like, let me play devil's advocate?
Culturally tricky. In confrontational cultures, it's understood as an intellectual exercise. In avoids confrontation cultures, it can sound like real opposition. You need to be really clear about your intent.
Good warning. Okay, last scale, scheduling. How late is late? How fixed is the schedule?
The scheduling scale. Linear time versus flexible time.
Linear time is one thing at a time. Deadlines are crucial. Punctuality is king.
Pretty much. Germany, Scandinavia, US, UK lean this way. Being late requires an explanation, usually an apology. Flexible time cultures, multitasking is more common, schedules are fluid, adaptable, more tolerance for interruptions.
Like France, Italy, Middle East, India, South America.
Generally, yes. Erin Meyer, being kept waiting by Madame Gagan in Paris, showed the greater leeway there compared to the US. And Renato in Brazil, prioritizing the customer over her strict presentation schedule. Classic flexible time.
So linear time folks might see flexible timers as chaotic, and flexible timers might see linear timers as rigid.
Exactly. Misunderstandings waiting to happen. Meyer uses the Q analogy. Linear time Sweden. Strict line, cutting is a crime. Flexible time India, more like an evergreen tree, multiple lines forming organically.
So a meeting is like a queue. Linear time expects a strict agenda and timeline.
That's the idea. Asita being baffled by Germans needing Gitter choices months ahead. That's the clash between linear planning and flexible adaptability.
Yeah. Developing realistic international schedules must be tough then.
Hugely. Mutta being really late for his American boss's dinner was a hard lesson in linear time expectations. You often need to adapt, but these time perceptions run deep.
And it can vary even within regions, right? Like Tokyo versus Beijing punctuality.
Yes, Cam Johnson noticed that. Context matters too. But the general tendency is there.
So the strategy for mixed teams.
Talk about it up front. Agree on how this team will handle time, schedules, deadlines, lateness. Create a team agreement, reinforce it. Otherwise, frustration builds.
And ironically, each side often thinks the other side is inefficient and stressed.
Isn't that funny? Linear timers see flexible timers as chaotic. Flexible timers see linear timers as slaves to the clock. Erin's talk in indoor India, with people drifting in and out seamlessly, really embodied that flexible approach.
It really shows there's no single right way. Understanding is key.
Exactly. And that's where the culture map itself comes in plotting cultures on these 8 scales to see the relative differences and predict potential friction points.
Like Olivier, the French VP at Vallejo, using it to understand his global team.
Precisely. It's a tool for understanding. But Meyer stresses, use it with humility, no judgment. Frame differences positively. The goal is awareness, leading to better teamwork. Like the French say, knowing the illness is half the cure.
So identify the differences, then bridge them.
Yes. Act as a cultural bridge yourself. Help others see different perspectives. Suspend judgment. Maybe even mix up teams geographically. Rotate people to break down cultural silos. See diversity as an asset once you manage it well.
It comes back to that fundamental question. Are we all the same or all different?
And the answer is kind of both, right? We share humanity, but culture shapes us profoundly. Understanding those cultural nuances is vital for working together effectively across the globe.
This has been incredibly useful. So to quickly recap the big takeaways for everyone listening, really pay attention to communication context, high versus low. Adapt your feedback style, direct versus indirect. Tailor how you persuade, principles versus applications. Recognize leadership expectations, egalitarian versus hierarchical. Navigate decision-making, consensual versus top-down. Build trust the right way, task versus relationship. Manage disagreement carefully, confrontational versus avoids confrontation. And definitely respect different approaches to time, linear versus flexible.
Well summarized. And for you, the learner, hopefully this gives you a shortcut. Practical tools, frameworks to navigate global interactions more confidently, avoid overwhelm, and spark those aha moments.
Definitely. And for a final thought, reflect on your own cultural defaults. Where do you sit on these scales? Then think about a tricky cross-cultural interaction you've had. Try analyzing it using just one of these 8 dimensions. What might have been going on beneath the surface?
That's a great exercise. And if you want to dig deeper, check out the resources on Erin Meyer's website, erinmeyer.com. You can even compare culture maps for different countries there.